Welcome to the GeoOwl Podcast.
The new era of intelligence.
Welcome back to the GeoOwl Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Smith, CEO of GeoOwl, and I'm joined yet again today by our Chief Growth Officer, Jim Moore. Jim, I wanted to dive into your philosophy on leadership. You're a leader. A lot of people look up to you. A lot of our team members want to work with you and work for you. With you. And right there, I mean, that right there illustrates it exactly. What is your philosophy on leadership?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people think that, I want to get into management to manage people, right? Well, when you look at the requirements the government writes, they don't write a requirement that say, hey, we want a manager to manage this contract, and then we want the contract professional people, to do this, right? Mm-hmm. They always start with what the actual requirements are. We want technical professionals that have the ability to solve these complex intelligence requirements and security requirements that are, going to save lives, right? It always starts with that. And then from there, the government starts looking at it. They say, okay, well, and what type of support system do we want to provide those people, right? So you mentioned people want to work for me, right? I don't think anybody wants to work for me. They might like working with me. Some people don't like working with me, right? But it's really, I always look at it, you talk about the upside down pyramid, right? All the work happens up at the top, right? And at the very bottom of the pyramid, it's not the top of the pyramid and everybody reports to this, this big hierarchy, and the program manager is the senior person or the CEO is the senior person, and we all work for Nick, right? Well, that's not really the case, right? Especially when you look at contract requirements. It's always here are the requirements, and by the way, we also need somebody to help facilitate this and manage this. So really, who's working for who? And I really think leadership comes from, it's not a new philosophy, right? Jesus talked about it back in the Bible. He was really one of the first people that was really talking about it, right? You got disciples and he washed their feet, right? So servant leadership is about what can we do as managers to help facilitate their success. And I think when you have that philosophy, it really breeds a team of cohesive people that want to do more, right? And if you start looking at if as a program manager, you say, well, what can I do to help you be better at your job? Right, and I think that really gets into if you can help them be better at their job, then you're solving the customer's problems. At the end of the day, if you're solving the customer's problem, you're doing a good job, and you're helping them do a good job, then the reward is going to come through more work, right? Better output, better outcomes, and so that's really just the philosophy of servant leadership. Is that as managers, let's figure out how we can serve those around us and do better for them.
I believe on one of the previous episodes, I mentioned that I really do think you're the absolute best, one of the best in this industry in terms of taking a requirement, building a team, and answering the mail on that requirement. I've worked with a lot of companies in a lot of different places, and I haven't seen anybody quite do it the way you do, and with the confidence and the surety that you tackle these types of things from. How do you approach a big, massive requirement, a big opportunity, a large contract? What's going through your mind when you see things like that coming out?
So we've spoken in previous episodes about different philosophies and different putting to the whole brain management, right? So I am only a big picture person, right? If you put me in at a detail level for a long period of time, I'm going to fail miserably. So when I look at that type of stuff, one, I try to ask, I'm okay, well, what are the bigger questions that they're trying to solve, right? And then who are the smart people and smart companies that are best capable to solve those, right? And then it's not just a matter of how do you find those people and those companies that are best capable of solving those problems, but how do you make them work together? And how do you tell that in a compelling story that fits within the acquisition, the solicitation requirements, the way that the government has asked for them? I think that's always a challenge, and I don't know if there is a right there's never a right one size fits all, right? And then the other aspect is also, how do you tell that in a easy to understand approach, right? I think far too often we overcomplicate things, right? We try to say, oh, we need to come up with this big diagram, and we need to like have this goes over here, and it just becomes way too much to actually understand. Or you get like these very intelligent, highly capable individuals that go into the problem set, but they're sort of like they're those detailed oriented people, right? And they put together all these little nitnoid details, but they forget how to actually make it tell a story. We're visual people, right? Specifically you and I, we're geospatial people, right? And I think there's a reason why Hollywood is so successful at telling stories, right? And there's a reason why people like going to the movies and people like reading books, right? And there's a reason there's a chapter 1 and chapter 2, and you go through that whole process of building up a story and getting people into it and then pulling them back out and then getting back into it, and then you finish off with some climax and then you soften up, right? Whatever that process is. I think in proposals in any acquisition, you need to figure out the best way to lay out that story. And it's okay to go deep, right? But nobody wants to read a 40-page document where the whole thing just like makes your head hurt, right? So it's about telling that framework of what your solution is, and then allowing different components that you can pull out and expand upon it. Some of the companies I've worked with, they're going to understand this acronym MOAG, right? Mother of all graphics, right? So that's what we do in a lot of our proposals. We start off, we might give like a one-pager, and then we give a mother of all graphics, right? And it says, over the next 40 pages, you're going to see our solution that encapsulates, X, Y, P, D, Q, and it flows through this certain process, right? And you're going to visually capture you're going to brand different components of your solution, right? And then when you brand it, what you're able to do is you're able to tell the audience or tell your evaluators visually, this brand fits within this part of the process, right? So then as you get down to that little section lower down in the proposal, you can actually expand out upon that. But anyway, I think that's just sort of my overall approach is, I'm trying to figure out what the big picture is, and then getting the really smart people to solve those individual parts and then do it in a visual manner.
Yeah, I noticed you always have a whiteboard around, or you have something to draw on. You have drawings on napkins. You probably got drawings on your book there about. Yep, there you go. Yep, see, there's some proposal solutioning going on. So that's very cool. You talked a little bit about the role that visualization plays in building a cohesive proposal and putting those pieces together with a story that makes sense. I've always, you always hear this thing that proposals aren't read, they're evaluated.
Yeah.
Or, I always hear the same kind of tropes over and over again. But at the end of the day, if somebody's reading a proposal or evaluating it, if they're evaluating it, they have to read it. So it has to be in some kind of sense-making fashion.
Yeah. And there is a lot of truth to it, right? So when you're doing a proposal, you need to. You can write a really good proposal that's very well read, right? It makes it easy and it goes through. But if you don't give the evaluator anything to actually evaluate, right? It's a numbering system, right? More strengths mean you win. Less strengths means you lose. More weaknesses mean you lose. Less weaknesses mean you win, right? So, but the reason I've really focused on making it easy to evaluate and telling it in a logical sense is because if it makes sense in their mind, then you need to get into the points and this is how you evaluate it. All right, so the government's going to tell you what their evaluation criteria is, and then you need to look at their evaluation criteria, and from there, just because you say there's a guy I used to work with, brilliant in the solutioning and proposal and capture the entire process. I won't say his last name, first name Mark, right? You know him, but he used to always say, he goes, proposals aren't evaluated. Or proposals aren't read, they're evaluated, and just because you say it's so doesn't make it true, right?
Right.
We can sit here all day and say we are the best geospatial professional company in the industry, right? Cool. That sounds great. I don't believe it, right? But if we're being evaluated on the statement, right? If we said we
Well,
are the
you
best,
believe it.
I believe it. It's true. It's true. But if we said GeoOwl is the best geospatial company in the industry because we provide XYZ PDQ, which resulted in saving 1,000 kittens, you know,
Right.
then
Well, your son would love that.
he would. He's
Yeah.
definitely a cat guy.
And-
But then, at that point in time, when you end up adding that extra context to what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
the government can say, okay, I believe. They can hit that I believe box because they said, you know, because of this, and this is the proof, right? So you always say understanding, approach, proof.
So if I'm a young person that wants to get involved in bidding on large government contracts, or even if I'm not young, if I just want to get involved and I'm newer to the space, where do I start? Where do I begin my journey of understanding how to digest such a complex thing and break it down into little parts? Like, is there resources that people can use to go learn this stuff? Like, how did you learn? Just by doing?
Honestly, just by doing, not necessarily being scared to step out of your comfort zone. There are different training. Shipley has some training out there. Shipley is a big capture management. They sort of talks will help you get through that whole process, their entire certification process through Shipley. But I think the best lessons in life are learned by doing. Right, that's how I learn. I've never had any real formal proposal capture training outside of the stuff that the company offered, but just by doing, right? It's a matter, like I remember the first proposal I worked on, we were largely on our own writing it. We had a couple, proposal resources in the back. We submitted a yellow proposal, right? A lot of times if you're, a lot of proposal will be evaluated, red, yellow, green, purple, blue. And yellow is like, all right, you satisfactorily met these.
Right.
Didn't do very well.
Thumbs up, buddy.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, like a hat, like sideways, partially down, by this point. But it was a yellow proposal. I think we may have had like a green in one section or something, but it was very bad. But it was a great lesson, right? We got our debrief. We got to see where we were, where we did well and where we did poorly. We didn't do very well in many of the places. That was about 15 years ago. But then the next one we got a little bit better, right?
Right.
And then there's also the components of like pricing, right? How do you price it and tell a good solution? Because you can't just say, hey, I'm going to give you the world, but I'm going to price it for the price of a cup,
Right.
It has to match. Your pricing has to match. So it's all that strategy, but it's just by doing it, and getting involved. I know within GeoOwl, we have the Engage business group, and we'll hold different training sessions in there. And like I've done individual training sessions where, I'll just break down an RFP. I'm like, this is what Section L says, right? Section L within an RFP, not always the case, but usually it's the case of, this is your instructions to the offers. This is what the government's going to expect to see. This is how they, when it's going to be submitted, font size, sections you're going to need to have in there, administrative, technical management, past performance pricing, whatever it is, compensation plan. And then Section M is the qualifying criteria. Right, so I've gone through those different, sections and said, when the government says this is the type of stuff you need to be looking for. So that's one spot, and all companies have it. Well, all good. I'm going to say all good companies.
Right.
My old company, when I worked for the bigs, they had classes like that, but you had to get out of your comfort zone. Right, and also think back, at the very beginning, you were talking about like servant leadership and management and whatnot. Managers, like I haven't done the technical aspects of the job for a long time, right? So when it comes time to writing technical portions of the proposal, like that's not me, right? But that's where an analyst on the line or a technician out on the line, out on the customer site, they absolutely can get involved. They can, talk to their program manager, talk to their senior leadership, say, hey, how do I get involved? Because when it comes time to writing those portions of the proposal, that's where they can really start learning, getting involved and helping out and providing those nuggets of goodness.
So at the end of the day, a lot of the times we get, the end product is this really well thought out proposal. It's got great graphics. It tells a story. I don't know if the government understands how much time and effort goes into these things. What do you wish your customer knew? I mean, a lot of times we don't get feedback. You'll send in a RFI response or something like that, and you don't get feedback. No one tells you anything about like, oh, this was a great idea. We really like this. Are we wasting our time doing that stuff? What are those things you wish you would get back from the government, or things that you wish the government knew about the work that you're doing? Because a lot of times you're not getting feedback. You're just not. It's not going to happen. Or at least in my experience, some of these things we bid on for a year, and then we don't hear anything for months and months, and delays and protests. And then sometimes you never even hear back from, you never get feedback on all that stuff that you just built, all that great energy you expended and money on building solutions and teams and proposals. What are those high level or even low level things that you kind of wish you could see?
Yeah, so you're right. A lot of times the government, I don't think they really understand how much goes into the proposal process, to the acquisition process, to the capture process, and how much that actually costs. And it's no fault. I don't think it's any direct fault of their own, any more than it's our fault that we don't necessarily know exactly how the government operates. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I've never been a senior government leader, and I've never been part of their developing out their entire acquisition strategy or funding lines or anything like that. But wouldn't it be interesting if there was like cross-industry internships, right, where the government actually got to sit with a company for 6 months through a lot and work with them and developing out a proposal, maybe just watching. Maybe it would be maybe if they're over in SOCOM, maybe they got to participate in an NGA acquisition process, right? That way you can keep those firewalls. Wouldn't that be interesting? And vice versa. I think it would be like, I'll tell you what, if I got to sit with the government for 6 months or 3 months even, right? I think that would be an incredible lesson for me to be able to understand fully their entire acquisition process. I think that would, I don't know, if there's any government personnel listening to that, that's what you should try. Implement that.
Send Jim an email at jim@geoil.com so he can come side saddle you for 3 months. You get to look at his beautiful smiling face the whole time.
So the other aspect I think that would be really good is there's always this was a very hard lesson that I experienced I guess about 6 years ago, is that there's this line between, or the barrier between, acquisition and operations, right? They're two separate customers in many cases, right? And it doesn't matter. Sometimes it doesn't matter how good of a job you do on operations. It may not trickle its way over to acquisition, and vice versa, right? So as an industry professional, you have to understand, hey, there's two different customers. You have operations, you have acquisitions. You need to be speaking to all of your different stakeholders. Right, and I think as a PMP, I now understand the different stakeholders and doing that stakeholder identification. But I think that's very important, right? Knowing who your stakeholders are and what's important to them. It's certainly important when you're writing your proposals, but it's also very important throughout the entire execution phase. As a former program manager, I think that's certainly somewhere that I failed. Is that we did a very good job providing a lot of really good stuff for operations. And when it came time to do the program management reviews on a monthly or quarterly basis, acquisition was always, oh, we're actually okay. We're really busy. We're all going to be like, are you sure we're good? Here's the monthly report, or here's the quarterly report. And it was like that for the full 5 years, right? But then we didn't have that customer intimacy with the acquisition, and that was so important to leading into the follow-on, right? So I think that's a really big aspect of not just winning new work, but keeping the work, right? And educating them, right? It's one thing to do good things, and then it's okay to tell them like, hey, by the way, we've been doing some really good things here, and this is how this is the stuff that we've been doing. This is how it's been benefiting the mission, right? It's okay. Pat yourself on the back sometimes.
It's all right to brag on yourself sometimes.
It is. And brag on them, right? Tell them
Right.
that they're doing a good job. You're doing a great job, Nick.
Gee, thanks. I mean, if you look at acquisitions as a whole, right, the length of time it takes to acquire something from the government, I'll just say anything. You go through that whole process, and then you get to the end of that process, and then you have protests. You know, and a lot of times these things take years and years. And we talked about the barriers to working with the government in the first place. So it's not very easy to get an innovative new technology into the government space. Do you think the whole process has to be blown up? Because I do. I think the whole process is completely asinine. The whole idea that someone's going to write this sheet of paper and say, you have to do these things, and then someone else says, okay, we'll do these things and we'll make it cool. I think the whole process is really dumb. I really do. It takes so long. It's just screaming for someone to change that. And it never happens, right?
So how should it be changed?
Well, I mean, for one, it should be a lot easier to enter the space, right? You should be, if you have something cool and transformative, me as a taxpayer, I want the government to have that, right? I want them to be using the best technology. I want our government to be light speed ahead. I want them to be saving us our tax dollars, but also I want them to be efficient, right? So breaking down the barrier to entry has to be paramount. That has to be number one. Number two, these dang protest things are ridiculous. I mean, let's be real. Protests they're just crazy. The fact that you could lose, your company could lose, and then because you lose, you can cry foul and then protest, and then you don't lose, right? And or
but there is some merit to protests.
I'm not saying there's no merit to it. I'm just saying that you and I both know there are companies whose game plan is to protest. That is their they bid on stuff, they protest, and all it does is muck up the system. On top of that, even without the protests, how many times does the government have a vendor they already know that they like? Why can't they just hire that vendor again? Why do they need to compete it?
But don't you? But don't.
I understand why they have to compete it. These are regulations and all that crap. But if you like your landscaper, right? They're doing a great job, and they're killing it. They got great reviews and high marks, and they're doing fantastic work for you. Why do you want to compete that? And I get. How do you get new innovation and new things to market? But eventually, there's going to be a time when that landscaper is not innovative anymore, right? If you're unhappy with them at some point, then they could choose to recompete it. But I just think about how much time and money is wasted on acquisitions that aren't going anywhere. How many opportunities are posted on FedBiz Ops or whatever, SAM.gov, GovWin, all these cool tools we use, where people don't have a chance, but yet they're spending thousands of dollars building bids and proposals to bid on those things. I mean, I know we've done that before for sure, where the customer already knew who they wanted, right? But they can't just go out and say that, right? So I just think from start to finish, the whole process is completely broken, and there's no innovation at all. Small businesses shouldn't have to hop over these massive regulatory burdens that large businesses do. I mean, they're just crazy. The amount of red tape. Why do we need to say that we're not, trafficking children when we're bidding on an intelligence contract? Why? It's a silly thing to ask. It's just the regulations on top of the whole process is just crazy to me.
So if you were the government, what would some of your recommendations be on how to get better innovation or better acquisition? Let's start with innovation. What could the government do better to help small businesses, big business, any company to bring in innovation?
Well, you talked about the gap between the operational people and the acquisitions people. Why not give those operational people some acquisition authority? Give them some money. Let them go buy the things that will improve their mission. A lot of times they're not trusted with the pocketbook. I get it. People are worried about corruption, but at a certain point, you have to trust people. If you want to actually improve things, you have to have the people that are on the ground that are working to solve those real problems. You have to give them some authority to purchase the things that they want to purchase. It's the same thing in a big business, right? Like, a large business, you don't have to go to the CEO of Coca-Cola if Coca-Cola needs to buy some new trucks, right? It doesn't need to go to that level. It doesn't have to go through some big cumbersome process. I just think that the regulations have to change. They're way out of scope. They're not implemented correctly. It's a hot mess in my opinion. So, if we're just talking about innovation, push some acquisition authority down to people on the operational level. Let them go buy some.
Like a certain dollar threshold, or
sure, why not? Why not? Or do we not trust these people? Of course we do.
So I know SOCOM had tried that years. It's been years now,
right?
And they actually had to pull back a little bit because there was some of that. I don't know if you want to call it nefarious activities. I don't know. I don't think it was.
Of
really
course, there has
nefarious
to be oversight,
or intentional necessarily. But sometimes you push the easy button and it like sort of can circumvent some of the innovative processes that you might already. Because the easy button doesn't necessarily get you the best innovation.
Right.
So it's that balancing act between how do you make this more efficient while also having that oversight to make sure that there isn't any of that nefarious activities taking place. Right.
But if you look in that whole, right, if we're only trying to build a system of acquisition that avoids corruption, right, you would never get anywhere. Period. I mean, it's the same reason why we, if we wanted to avoid human death from car accidents, we could just, make driving cars illegal. But we don't do that because cars provide us a benefit. We can get to where we want to go quickly. The system should be designed for maximum innovation. Innovation is the thing that drives the future. It determines, how much bang for our buck we're getting every time we're spending our tax dollars. Every time they're taking money out of our paychecks. I want that money to go in the most efficient way possible. And it's impossible for the government to innovate in any sort of timeline. I mean, you go into military sites, you go into government buildings, they're using old stuff a lot of the times because they don't have a way to innovate. The system is so broken and worried about corruption and regulation and bureaucracy and less worried about innovation when innovation should be the pinnacle of our government. That should be the thing we're all aiming to do things better and faster. So.
Well, I know we've struggled even with pattern flows, right? We take this out to the customer. They're like, "Oh man, this is awesome. How do I get this in?"
Right.
And it's like, "Well, you got to go through this vehicle, or what? Do you have this access to this vehicle?" Or it's like, "No, well, you need to talk with this company, or you got to go through this process, or we have this annual, industry. It's so laborious. It's just like, man, it's like how this helps. How do you get it in? Nobody's doing it. Right. Nobody's doing it.
This is cool.
So, I get it. Yeah,
saves time, money, lives, but we can't get it done.
I do have a question for you. Mm-hmm. So you just mentioned about vehicles and innovation. What are your thoughts? Little break. Take a deep breath. Mm-hmm. Self-driving vehicles.
Self-driving vehicles?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a shift.
It is.
Well, all I can think about self-driving vehicles is it's inevitable. I mean, they're already here, basically. You look at what Tesla's doing. You look at what all the other car companies are doing. Not too far in the future, we'll be just riding in cars. We're not driving.
Is it actually legal right now?
I don't think so. No,
in any of the states?
No,
wasn't there like some that like I don't know, they were being drawn to cops parked on the side or something, like slamming into them or something? I'm
not sure. I believe most of the states say that you can have the car in self-driving mode, but you have to have your hand on the wheel or something like that. And most of the cases are for highway use, although I think Tesla now is pushing into full-blown full-blown use, and they're well ahead of the game. But it's just going to be an inevitable fact, right? That's progress. There's a lot of incentive. But you know what else it kind of does? If you don't have to drive everywhere, right, that's going to free up more time to do other things, right? Like gaming or thinking, more working, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important to think about it now and start putting, things in place to solve this. There's going to be some problems from that, right? Are people going to be overworking, over gaming? How many more screens do we really need? Do we need more screens in the car to look at? I really don't know. But the idea of hopping in my car and telling it to go to somewhere cool on the other side of the country and I'd take a nap for, a day, sounds pretty cool to me.
It's sort of like the control of having something to do.
Yeah.
Like I know when my wife
So you will
drives,
not be getting the self-driving car is what you're saying.
I'd like to go back a couple years. I'm going to be honest. I want to get rid of this. I want to get rid of my phone.
Okay. Well, you can. No one's forcing you to have the phone. I mean, you can drop the phone right now.
I'm going to convert to. No, I can't. I can't do that.
I mean, you can at least go back to the flip phone days and get you a chocolate.
A Nokia, a Motorola Flip.
A Razor.
Yeah. Holds like 10 numbers.
A Blueberry.
1 through 10.
Yeah.
Anyway, I know it was a shift, but
yeah.
If I didn't ask for your thoughts on the self-driving car, I would have forgotten 10 minutes later.
Okay. I'm curious to know why you were curious about me thinking about self-driving cars.
I mean, you're a techie guy. I like to go back.
Yeah. I think when we look at technology, it's very interesting because nobody, I think 50 or maybe a little bit further back, 50, 60 years ago, would have thought that information would be the thing, right? Like if you look at all the old movies and stuff, it was, I still want my hoverboard, damn it. I want my hoverboard that was promised to me in Back to the Future. Still don't have that yet, but it wasn't information. Information wasn't the thing that was going to drive technology, but it's also kind of obvious. It's kind of obvious in a way that, oh, duh. I mean, of course, it's the one thing that, is such it used to be so prohibitive to getting work done, to think about not having email. What would you do without email? I mean, forget it. What are you doing? I mean, you're writing letters to people. I mean, yeah. It's crazy. Where we're going next, I don't know. I think AI is certainly interesting. You look at a lot of the technologies out there revolving around AI. In our space, in the intelligence space, AI is able to actually write full-blown reports now. It's here. I mean, it can do that. It has there's a lot of open source natural language processing tools that can dig through data and kind of tell you what it sees in the data, right? Is it perfect? No, but it can get you to 70% of the way. It can get you to maybe to an 80% solution. But, technology as a whole kind of, keeps pushing forward in that respect, and humans' butts and seats become a little less relevant. I think we'll be spending a lot more of our time doing intelligence synthesis, like just putting some contextual pieces together, as opposed to doing the hardcore saying what factually happened, right? In intelligence, we try to present a timeline, a story, right, of events that have occurred, actors that have come in and out of the story, and create a picture and an easy set of decision options for people. Imagine if more people were spending their time putting more context into the story as opposed to saying the facts, right? The facts are going to be automated.
That's not really necessarily analysis, right? That's the intelligence report.
Right, but I bet today the bulk of intelligence analysis is just reporting facts. So the more we automate the facts, the more we can spend time on the synthesis. The things that humans do well is understanding the context of situations. This is what our brains are good at. We get that, just because something occurred at a certain time in a certain location doesn't necessarily mean anything one way or another. But our brains are designed in a way to enable us to visualize things that have occurred. So I'll give you an example, right? If I say, I went and saw a movie last night, right? You could easily understand that, and that you could kind of picture maybe a theater, maybe I went to a theater, or maybe I was at home and there was a screen there, and maybe there was probably somebody with me, because most people don't really go to the movies alone. But if you tell that to a computer, right, they're not going to have that contextual insight into the way people typically watch movies and the accompanying things that are tied to going to the movies, right? It's getting better at that. But imagine if we have more time to spend on synthesis, how much more intelligent juice could we squeeze out of the intelligence orange? That's kind of what I foresee as the future of intelligence and where we're going. So that's what we aim to do at GeoOwl, be the future of intelligence. That's why our saying is the new era of intelligence. And if you want to learn more about GeoOwl, visit us at geoowl.com, Instagram, Facebook. Send us a tweet even. We'll rarely go on there, but we'll even respond to that. But that wraps up this episode, and appreciate you joining me, Jim, and hope to have you on again.
Absolutely.
Visit geoowl.com and learn how GeoOwl implements next-generation intelligence advancement technologies to aid the Department of Defense with precision and expertise analysis. GeoOwl.
The new era of intelligence.